My hands trembled as I made a late-night snack in nothing but my silky nightgown. The peanut butter jar slipped from my fingers, dollops landing on my inner thigh. Before I could grab a towel, Shadow was there, his hot breath against my skin making me gasp. "Shadow, wait," I whispered, but his tongue was already lapping eagerly at me. My head fell back, fingers tangling in his thick fur. Each stroke of his rough tongue sent electricity through me, inching higher up me. I should have pushed him away. Should have cleaned up and gone to bed. Before I continue going into detail of that forbidden incident, let me go back to when I first had Shadow. My name is Emma Lawson, and I've always been good at two things: winning arguments and losing people. As a corporate attorney in New York City, I've built a reputation for being unflinching, precise, and relentless. My inbox is always full, my coffee always black, and my evenings usually spent in a sterile office lit by the glow of a computer screen. It's a good life, or at least that's what I tell myself on the days when the silence in my apartment doesn't feel quite so heavy. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when I believed in balance, in soft edges and quiet mornings. But somewhere between law school and making partner, I lost the parts of myself that used to matter. Friends drifted away. My last relationship ended with a slammed door and a suitcase left in the hallway. "You don't let anyone in, Emma," he said. I scoffed at the time. Letting people in was a liability, and in my world, liabilities weren't allowed. Then came the panic attacks. They started a month ago, creeping in like thieves in the night. At first, I could ignore them. Just a tightness in my chest, a flutter of unease. But then came the nights I woke up gasping for air, gripping the edge of the bed as if the world itself was tilting. My therapist called it burnout. I called it weakness. But no matter what name I gave it, the truth remained. I was unraveling, and I didn't know how to stop it. "You need to step out of your head, Emma," Dr. Moretti told me during our last session. "Find something, someone, to connect with. A plant, a pet, a hobby. Anything to remind you there's more to life than work." I resisted at first. Therapy was supposed to fix me, not send me shopping for succulents or babysitting a goldfish. But after another sleepless night staring at my ceiling, I found myself scrolling through pet adoption sites. It was a half-hearted attempt at best, a way to prove to Dr. Moretti that I was trying. That's when I saw him. Shadow's photo wasn't like the others. Where most of the dogs on the shelter's page were bright-eyed and eager, Shadow looked tired. A scruffy mix of breeds with matted black fur, a cloudy right eye, and a patchy scar along his muzzle. His bio was short. Shadow is a quiet, reserved dog looking for a patient home. He has a history of neglect, but is ready to trust the right person. I closed the page 3 times before opening it again. Something about him stuck with me, like a splinter lodged under the skin. He wasn't what I imagined when Dr. Moretti suggested a companion. But maybe that was the point. Shadow's adoption wasn't exactly a picture-perfect experience. The shelter smelled of antiseptic and damp fur, a combination that made me wrinkle my nose as I walked through the rows of kennels. Dogs of every size and color barked and leaped at the chain-link doors, tails wagging wildly. All except Shadow. He was curled in the corner of his kennel, his head resting on his paws, as if he was trying to disappear into the concrete floor. "That's him," the shelter worker said, her voice soft as she pointed to the quiet dog. "He's been with us for a while. Most people want the energetic ones, you know?" I stared at him for a moment, uncertain. Shadow didn't even lift his head. His fur looked rougher in person, his scars more pronounced. A faint tremor ran through his body as the worker opened the gate. He didn't run to greet me like the other dogs had. Instead, he looked up at me with cautious eyes, as if bracing for whatever came next. "He's a bit shy," the worker added, her tone apologetic. "But he's a good boy once he warms up." I crouched down, holding out my hand the way I'd seen people do in movies. "Hi, Shadow," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "I'm Emma." Shadow didn't move. His nose twitched slightly, but he didn't make any effort to come closer. The silence stretched between us, uncomfortable and heavy. "You don't have to take him," the worker said gently. He's a lot of work. Honestly, most people... I'll take him, I said abruptly, cutting her off. I didn't know where the words came from, but once they were out, they felt oddly right. The paperwork was quick but full of warnings. Shadow had been found wandering the streets, severely underweight and with signs of physical abuse. He didn't like loud noises, sudden movements, or being left alone for too long. He wasn't house-trained and might never fully trust people. The list of potential issues went on, but I signed my name anyway. The first night at home was rough. Shadow didn't bark or whine. He just sat in the corner of the living room, staring at the wall. I had bought him a plush dog bed, a new collar, and even an assortment of chew toys, but he ignored them all. When I tried to approach him, he flinched, his whole body trembling. Okay, I whispered, backing off. We'll take it slow. I spent the rest of the evening pretending to work on my laptop, sneaking glances at Shadow every few minutes. He didn't move, not even when I put a bowl of food near him. The silence in the apartment felt heavier than usual, pressing down on me like a weight. By midnight, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling again. The old doubts crept in, whispering that this was a mistake, that I wasn't equipped for this. I wasn't the kind of person who knew how to take care of anything, let alone a dog with a broken past. A faint sound pulled me out of my thoughts. Padding. Quiet, hesitant steps on the hardwood floor. I held my breath as the noise grew closer, stopping just outside my bedroom door. Shadow? I called softly, sitting up. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette small and uncertain. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he took one step forward, then another. He stopped at the foot of the bed, his one good eye meeting mine. I patted the mattress tentatively, unsure if he'd understand. To my surprise, he jumped up, curling into a tight ball at the very edge of the bed. He didn't come close enough to touch me, but he stayed. And for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. The next morning, I woke up to find Shadow gone, back in his corner of the living room. But something had shifted. He didn't shy away when I walked by, and he even sniffed at the bowl of food I set down. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I was beginning to realize that this wasn't going to be easy. Shadow was damaged in ways I didn't fully understand. And so, if I was honest, was I? But for some reason, that made me want to try even harder. Maybe, I thought, we could help each other. Maybe we both needed someone to show us that it was okay to trust again. The following weeks passed in fits and starts, like an old engine sputtering to life. Shadow and I fell into an uneasy rhythm. Each day began with tentative steps, both literal and figurative. He would hover near the door as I prepared for work, his tail giving the faintest of wags. At night, I'd find him lying closer to me, no longer in the farthest corner of the room. But outside my apartment, the rest of my life was unraveling. Work became a battlefield. The firm had just landed a major merger deal, and every partner was jockeying for the lead. As one of the youngest and newest to the position, I felt the pressure to prove myself. Meetings stretched into late nights, and my phone became an extension of my hand, buzzing with emails and demands at all hours. It didn't help that my personal life was under scrutiny, too. My ex-boyfriend, Michael, still worked in the same building, and his pitying glances in the elevator felt like tiny daggers. "You seem stressed," he'd said one morning, his voice dripping with concern that only made me grit my teeth harder. "Are you sure you're handling everything okay?" I wanted to scream, but instead, I plastered on the same tight smile I always wore. "I'm fine," I said, the words tasting like ash. By the time I got home each night, my nerves were frayed, my temper short. Shadow seemed to sense it. He'd retreat to his corner when I walked in, his ears flat against his head. One night, after a particularly brutal day at the office, I snapped. "Why won't you just come when I call you?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. Shadow flinched, curling into himself like a leaf under a harsh wind. The sight of his trembling form was like a punch to the gut. "Oh God," I whispered, sinking to the floor. "I'm sorry, Shadow. I'm so sorry." I didn't know who I was apologizing to, him or myself. The breaking point came one Friday evening. The office had been chaos all day, a relentless stream of meetings and arguments over the merger deal. By the time I left, the sky was bruised with storm clouds, the air thick and oppressive. I'd promised myself I'd spend the evening with Shadow, maybe even attempt a walk in the park, but my mind was still racing with unfinished work. We made it halfway through the park before the heavens opened. Rain poured down in thick sheets, soaking through my coat and plastering my hair to my face. Shadow froze, his eyes wide with fear as thunder rumbled overhead. "Come on, Shadow," I urged, tugging gently at his leash. "We have to go." But he wouldn't move. His body was rigid, his breaths coming in sharp, panicked bursts. The storm had thrown him back into whatever dark place he'd come from, and I didn't know how to pull him out. Another crack of thunder. This time, Shadow bolted. The leash slipped from my hands as he darted into the woods, his dark coat blending into the shadows. "Shadow!" I screamed, running after him. The ground was slick, the rain blinding. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, pain shooting through my ankle. I tried to stand, but the world tilted, my ankle refusing to bear my weight. "Shadow!" I called again, my voice breaking. Panic surged through me, cold and relentless. I was alone, injured, and I'd lost the only thing in my life that felt remotely meaningful. For a moment, the rain drowned out everything. The past weeks, the stress, the isolation, the relentless ache of feeling like I was failing at everything, crashed over me. I pressed my face into the muddy ground, my tears mixing with the rain. Then I heard it, the sound of paws splashing through the mud. Shadow appeared, his wet fur plastered to his body, his cloudy eye searching for me. He stopped a few feet away, hesitating, before creeping closer. His nose nudged my shoulder, his warm breath a stark contrast to the cold rain. "You came back," I whispered, choking on the words. "You came back for me." Shadow nudged me again, more insistent this time, as if urging me to get up. I wrapped my arms around his neck, my tears soaking into his fur. For the first time, he didn't pull away. He stayed, steady and solid, his presence anchoring me. With his help, I managed to hobble back to the main path, leaning on him as if he were a lifeline. By the time we reached home, we were both soaked and shivering, but something had shifted between us. For the first time, I felt like Shadow wasn't just my responsibility. He was my partner, my savior. That night, as Shadow curled beside me on the couch, I stared at the glowing city skyline through my rain-speckled window. I thought about the storm, not just the one outside, but the one inside me. The constant need to be perfect, to control everything, to shut people out before they could hurt me. It had driven Michael away. It had made me miserable. And it was unfair to Shadow, who had only ever needed me to be present. "I'll do better," I whispered into the quiet, my hand resting on Shadow's head. He leaned into my touch, his tail giving a soft wag. The storm had broken something open in me, but it had also made room for something new, hope. And this is when the incident occurred, when I was vulnerable. I went downstairs to get a late-night snack from the kitchen. I leant up into the cupboard to get the peanut butter jar and pulled it down. Shadow eagerly waiting next to me for a scoop. My hands trembled as I made a late-night snack in nothing but my silky nightgown. The peanut butter jar slipped from my fingers, dollops landing on my inner thigh. Before I could grab a towel, Shadow was there, his hot breath against my skin making me gasp. "Shadow, wait," I whispered, but his tongue was already lapping eagerly. My head fell back, fingers tangling in his thick fur. Each stroke of his rough tongue sent electricity through me. I should have pushed him away, should have cleaned up and gone to bed. Instead, I found myself getting more and more involved, more into it. How so wrong this was, but so nice. That night changed everything between us. As I lay trembling in the aftermath, Shadow's head resting possessively on my stomach, I knew there was no going back. This was just the beginning of our forbidden dance. In the weeks following the storm, Shadow and I grew closer in ways I never expected. He began following me from room to room, his tail wagging faintly whenever I spoke to him. For the first time, he would rest his head on my lap while I worked or curl up next to me on the couch. Trust wasn't something he gave easily, but little by little he was letting me in. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. But life, as always, had a way of testing the fragile peace we'd built. It started innocently enough. I had run into an old college acquaintance, Liam, while picking up Shadow's new leash at the pet store. He had the same easy smile I remembered and a golden retriever named Daisy, who immediately made friends with Shadow. For once, Shadow didn't seem entirely averse to another dog's company, though he kept his distance from Liam, his usual caution with strangers in full force. "You know," Liam said as we watched the dogs sniff at opposite ends of the store, "you always seemed too serious back in school, but you look different now." "Different how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Lighter," he said with a grin. "Happier." I didn't know what to say to that. Happier wasn't a word I'd ever used to describe myself. But before I could overthink it, Liam handed me his number. "If you ever want to grab coffee or take the dogs to the park, call me." Against my better judgment, I did. The date was simple: coffee at a quiet cafe followed by a walk in the park. Liam was kind, funny, and easy to talk to, a stark contrast to the sharp, transactional conversations I was used to at work. For a moment, I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could let someone in. But Shadow had other ideas. From the moment Liam stepped into my apartment to pick me up, Shadow was on edge. His body stiffened, his ears pinned back, and a low growl rumbled in his throat whenever Liam came too close. I tried to reassure him, scratching behind his ears and telling him it was okay, but nothing worked. "He's protective, huh?" Liam said with a nervous laugh as Shadow's growls grew louder. "Sorry," I muttered, tugging Shadow's leash to pull him back. "He's not usually like this." That wasn't entirely true. Shadow had never been particularly fond of strangers, but this was different. It was as if he saw something in Liam that I didn't. The walk didn't go much better. Shadow refused to walk beside us, instead lagging behind with his head low and his body tense. At one point, Liam tried to offer him a treat, crouching down and holding it out with an encouraging smile. "Come on, buddy," Liam said. "I'm not that bad, am I?" Shadow didn't move. He stared at Liam with an intensity that made my stomach twist. Then, without warning, he barked, a sharp warning sound that echoed through the park. "Shadow," I scolded, pulling him back. "What's wrong with you?" But he didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on Liam, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. Liam stood, raising his hands in surrender. "It's okay," he said, but his voice had lost its earlier warmth. The rest of the date was awkward at best. Liam kept his distance, and I spent most of the time trying to soothe Shadow, who remained on high alert. By the time we returned to my apartment, the easy connection I'd felt earlier had vanished. "Well," Liam said, his smile forced, "thanks for the walk. Maybe we'll try again sometime." "Yeah," I said, though I didn't mean it. I was too preoccupied with Shadow, who stood between me and Liam like a guard dog, his body blocking the doorway. After Liam left, I sank onto the couch with a sigh. Shadow sat at my feet, his tail wagging slightly as if he'd won some kind of victory. I stared at him, torn between frustration and gratitude. "You didn't like him, huh?" I said, scratching behind his ears. He leaned into my touch, his cloudy eye meeting mine. "You're kind of a jerk, you know that?" He licked my hand in response, his tail thumping against the floor. Despite everything, I couldn't stay mad at him. There was something oddly comforting about the way he'd inserted himself into my life, refusing to let anyone else get too close. It was as if he'd decided that I was his, and he wasn't willing to share. But as I sat there, stroking his fur, I couldn't help but wonder, was Shadow protecting me from something I couldn't see? Or was he just scared of losing the one stable thing in his life, just like I was? Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the date. Part of me wanted to be angry at Shadow for ruining it, But the truth was, I wasn't sure I'd been ready to let someone like Liam in. I'd spent so long building walls around myself that the idea of tearing them down felt impossible. Shadow, on the other hand, had no walls when it came to me. He trusted me completely now, in a way that was raw and unguarded. Every time he wagged his tail when I came home, or rested his head on my lap during a late-night work session, I felt a little less alone. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. Shadow wasn't just my dog. He was my partner, my anchor, the one constant in a world that often felt too chaotic to handle. He wasn't perfect, and neither was I, but somehow we fit together. "Looks like it's just you and me, buddy," I said, smiling as he nuzzled into my side. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel like a compromise. It felt like enough. I have to be honest, though. The peanut butter incident was on my mind a lot, and I just could not get the same pleasure anywhere else. It became a frequent occurrence now. Not just with peanut butter either. The weeks that followed became a delicious exploration of taste and touch. Each night, my kitchen became our playground of innocent accidents. Honey dripped from my fingertips as I made tea. Strawberry jam somehow found its way onto my inner thighs during midnight snacks. Shadow seemed to know exactly when I'd be most clumsy with my foods. I started buying groceries with new intention. Smooth almond butter, thick Greek yogurt, whipped cream. The way Shadow's eyes would follow the containers, knowing what games lay ahead, made my skin flush. His tail would wag with anticipation as I'd accidentally spill something that needed his thorough attention. Sometimes I'd be preparing dinner in just my silk robe, and a splash of warm soup would trail down my leg. Shadow was always there, eager to help clean up, his tongue leaving no trace behind. The kitchen counter became my favorite spot, the cool marble against my heated skin, as he devoted himself to his task. Our routine evolved. Breakfast often involved dropped maple syrup, lunch might see some fallen cream cheese, and dinner, well, dinner became an adventure in itself. Shadow grew skilled at undoing my robe's tie with his teeth when he sensed there might be something sweet to clean up. I found myself getting creative. Vanilla ice cream proved particularly interesting on warm summer nights, while peanut butter remained our faithful favorite. The way it would stick to my skin, requiring extra attention from his determined tongue. Those evenings always ended with me trembling, gripping his fur as he made sure every last taste was gone. His growls of satisfaction mixing with my gasping breaths in the quiet kitchen. Who knew grocery shopping could become such an erotic experience? Each new item a promise of pleasure to come. Shadow certainly seemed to approve of my expanding culinary interests. After a few weeks, I knew enough was enough. This could not go on. I needed a man in my life. Someone I could learn to trust again and start a family with. For the first time in years, I was beginning to think about what life could look like beyond the walls of my apartment, beyond my work, beyond the quiet evenings with Shadow. I wanted something more. A family, maybe. Someone to share my life with. It was a thought I hadn't dared to entertain before. For so long, I had told myself I didn't need anyone else, that relationships were messy and distracting. But as Shadow and I carved out a life together, I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my days alone. The problem was, I wasn't the only one who had opinions about who should, or shouldn't, be in my life. Shadow had made it clear he wasn't a fan of Liam, and as I began dipping my toes into the world of dating, I quickly discovered that Liam wasn't the exception. He was the rule. Online dating felt like diving headfirst into a pool without checking for water. The first few dates were forgettable at best. A dinner with a man who spent the entire evening talking about himself. A coffee date with someone who turned out to be married. Each time, I returned home to Shadow, who greeted me with a wagging tail and a look that said, "I told you so." One evening, I invited a man named Eric over for dinner. He was charming, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. I cooked lasagna, lit candles, and tried to create an atmosphere that didn't scream, "I'm trying too hard." Shadow, however, was unimpressed. From the moment Eric walked through the door, Shadow was glued to my side, his eyes locked on my guest with a mix of suspicion and disdain. "Cute dog," Eric said, reaching out to pat him. Shadow ducked away, letting out a low growl. Sorry, I said quickly, pulling Shadow back. He's just protective. Eric laughed, but the tension in the room was palpable. Throughout dinner, Shadow positioned himself between us, his body rigid, his gaze unyielding. When Eric leaned closer to me, Shadow barked, loud and sharp enough to make both of us jump. By the end of the night, Eric was gone, and I was left with a sulking dog and a sense of defeat. The next morning, I sat on the couch with Shadow, a cup of coffee in one hand and his leash in the other. He looked at me with his usual calm expression, his tail thumping against the cushion. We need to talk, I said, as if he could understand me. I get it. You don't like strangers. But I'm trying here, okay? I can't spend the rest of my life alone, just because you don't trust anyone. Shadow tilted his head, his cloudy eye blinking slowly. It's not fair, I continued, my voice softening. You're my whole world, but I need more. I need someone who loves you too. Someone who understands what we've been through. Shadow licked my hand, his silent way of saying, I'm here. And as much as I wanted to be mad at him, I couldn't. He had been through so much, just like I had. His wariness wasn't just stubbornness, it was self-preservation. Determined to find a way to bridge the gap, I decided to involve Shadow more in the process. Instead of meeting people alone, I started taking Shadow with me. If someone wanted to get to know me, they'd have to get to know him too. The first few attempts were disasters. Shadow barked at one man who tried to pet him without asking. Another tripped over Shadow's leash during a walk and blamed me for not training him properly. It was exhausting, but I refused to give up. Somewhere out there, I believed, was someone who would accept us as a package deal. It was on a Sunday morning at the dog park that everything changed. Shadow and I were playing fetch. Well, I was throwing the ball, and Shadow was begrudgingly retrieving it, when a golden retriever bolted across the grass and intercepted the ball midair. Daisy! A voice called. I looked up to see a man jogging toward us, his cheeks flushed and his grin apologetic. Sorry about that. She gets a little too excited sometimes. It's fine, I said, smiling. Shadow doesn't mind sharing. The man knelt down, offering the ball back to Shadow, who sniffed his hand cautiously before taking it. I blinked in surprise. Shadow almost never let strangers get that close. I'm Alex, the man said, standing and holding out his hand. And that ball thief is Daisy. Emma, I replied, shaking his hand. And this is Shadow. We ended up talking for over an hour, swapping stories about our dogs and laughing at their antics. Alex was easygoing and attentive, and unlike the others, he didn't try to force himself into Shadow's space. He let Shadow approach him, offering treats and kind words, until, to my astonishment, Shadow allowed him to scratch behind his ears. Alex and I began meeting regularly at the park, our dogs running in circles while we talked. He was patient, never pushing for more than I was ready to give, and Shadow seemed to sense that. For the first time, I saw my dog relax around someone new, his guard dropping bit by bit. When Alex finally asked me out on a proper date, I hesitated. Shadow doesn't do well when I'm gone for too long, I admitted. Then we'll bring him, Alex said with a smile. Dinner at a dog-friendly cafe. It'll be a date for all three of us. I couldn't help but laugh. You're persistent, aren't you? Only when it's worth it. The date was a success. Shadow at my feet, Alex beside me, and Daisy happily chewing on a bone. It wasn't perfect. Shadow still had moments of hesitation, but Alex never seemed bothered. He treated Shadow with the same care and patience he showed me, and for the first time, I allowed myself to hope that this could work. As I watched Shadow wag his tail at Alex, I realized something. Finding love wasn't about forcing someone to fit into your life. It was about finding someone who made the pieces fit naturally. Someone who could see the beauty in the scars, both mine and Shadow's. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. As the weeks turned into months, Alex became a regular part of our lives. He wasn't perfect, He left coffee cups everywhere and insisted pineapple belonged on pizza. But he was patient, kind, and unwavering in his determination to fit into our world. Shadow still had his moments of wariness, but he was warming to Alex in his own way. Daisy helped too. Her sunny disposition was the perfect counterbalance to Shadow's cautious nature. It wasn't just Shadow who was learning to trust. I was too. Alex had a way of drawing me out of my shell, of making me laugh even on the hardest days. For the first time in years, I wasn't just existing, I was living. And it felt good. The first real test of our relationship came on a crisp autumn afternoon. Alex had invited me and Shadow to his family's cabin for a weekend getaway. It was meant to be a relaxing trip, just us, the dogs, and the quiet of the woods. But as we packed up the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something would go wrong. Shadow was restless, pacing back and forth as we loaded the bags. He wasn't a fan of long car rides, and I wasn't sure how he'd handle being in an unfamiliar place. But Alex was optimistic. "He'll be fine," he said, scratching behind Shadow's ears. "We'll take it slow." The drive was uneventful, but Shadow's tension was palpable. By the time we arrived at the cabin, he was panting heavily, his eyes darting around the unfamiliar surroundings. Daisy, on the other hand, bounded out of the car and immediately started exploring. "It's okay, buddy," I murmured, kneeling beside Shadow. "We're just here for a couple of days. You'll be safe, I promise." He looked at me, his cloudy eye reflecting a mix of trust and uncertainty. Slowly, he stepped out of the car, sticking close to my side as we walked toward the cabin. The first night was rough. Shadow refused to settle, pacing the cabin and whining softly whenever I tried to comfort him. Alex offered to help, but Shadow bristled at his presence, retreating to a corner and curling into a tight ball. "It's like he's regressing," I said, my voice tinged with frustration as I sat on the couch beside Alex. "I don't know what's wrong." Alex wrapped an arm around me, his touch grounding. "Maybe it's just too much too soon. He's been through a lot, Emma. So have you." His words hit harder than I expected. I realized then that I wasn't just worried about Shadow. I was worried about what this weekend meant for all of us. It wasn't just a getaway. It was a step forward, a test of whether we could truly blend our lives together. And the next morning, I decided to take Shadow for a walk to clear his head, and mine. The woods were quiet, the crisp air filled with the scent of pine and fallen leaves. Shadow stayed close, his leash slack but his posture tense. Then came the sound of gunfire. A hunter's shot echoed through the trees, distant but loud enough to send Shadow into a panic. He bolted, yanking the leash from my hand and disappearing into the woods. "Shadow!" I screamed, running after him. My heart pounded as I stumbled through the underbrush, branches scratching at my arms. Memories of the storm flooded back, the fear of losing him tightening like a vice around my chest. "Emma!" Alex's voice called from behind me. He had followed me into the woods, Daisy trotting beside him. "Where is he?" "He ran off!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "I have to find him!" We searched for hours, calling Shadow's name until our voices were hoarse. The sun began to dip below the horizon, and the cold seeped into my bones. I was on the verge of collapse when I heard it. A faint, pitiful whine. "Shadow?" I called, my heart leaping. I found him huddled beneath a fallen tree, his body trembling. His leash was tangled in the branches, pinning him in place. As I approached, he whimpered, his cloudy eye meeting mine with a look of sheer terror. "It's okay," I whispered, dropping to my knees. "I'm here." Alex arrived moments later, his face etched with concern. Together, we freed Shadow from the branches. As soon as he was untangled, he pressed himself against me, his entire body shaking. "You're okay," I murmured, stroking his fur. "You're safe now." That night, as we sat by the fire, Shadow curled beside me, I realized just how much he trusted me. Despite his fear, despite everything he'd been through, he had waited for me to find him. And I had. For the first time, I felt like I was truly enough. For him, for myself, and maybe even for Alex. Alex handed me a cup of tea, his eyes warm as they met mine. "You're incredible, you know that?" I laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I don't feel incredible." "You are," he said firmly. "The way you care for Shadow, the way you never give up on him, it's amazing. I'm lucky to be a part of your life." Tears pricked at my eyes as I leaned against him, Shadow's steady breathing a comforting rhythm beside me. For the first time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I could have it all. A partner who understood me, a dog who trusted me, and a life that felt whole. As the weekend came to a close, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Shadow still had his moments of fear, and I still had my doubts. But together, we were stronger. Alex had become more than just a boyfriend. He was a part of our little family. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future with him in it. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Shadow's scars would never fully fade, and neither would mine. But as we packed up the car and headed back to the city, I felt a quiet hope blooming in my chest. We weren't perfect. We were messy and complicated and still learning how to trust. But we had each other, and for now, that was enough.